Welcome back to what you will round up here on France 24. I'm Mark Owen. The breaking news this hour. Donald Trump convicted of all charges in the hush money trial. He was facing 34 felony counts over the payment of money for the silence of a former lover. Outside court, Trump has condemned the verdict as a disgrace, saying that he's a very innocent man. The jury nonetheless took a relatively short time to convict him. They deliberated for some 11 hours and had sections of their directions reread to them by the judge in order to make sure their verdict and their deliberations were on the right path. Trump found guilty of all charges in the hush money trial. This is World Roundup. Thank you very much for joining us. The trial of Donald Trump was already history-making by the very fact that it was taking place. The verdict has now taken that to a higher level. Donald Trump found guilty of all 34 charges against him in what has become known as the hush money trial. Money paid to a former lover. He denied being the former lover of the one-time adult film actress Stormy Daniels. But that money paid to her some $130,000 in order to keep her silence over their affair, which was indeed an extramarital affair. Trump was scared of what would happen in terms of his campaign to get elected in 2016. He was concerned that his voters would perhaps be shocked at the outrage committed by Trump, and therefore they tried to buy the silence of Stormy Daniels. In terms of what this meant, in terms of the laws that were broken, having an affair isn't, of course, a crime. But what was judged to be a crime was the fact that he covered up so much of how this was done. And of course, the fraud element is how this was all written off as a bona fide business expense. Let's listen now to Trump outside the court.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. But the real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here.
The words of an angry Donald Trump after being convicted of all 34 charges against him. Some of those words are defamatory, certainly in contempt of the court system. And one wonders about what this means for his candidacy as the presumptive Republican candidate going forward to the elections, the presidential election in November. Let's join our reporter at the courthouse in New York, Pamela Falk. Pamela, good evening to you. You're there where history is being made. Give us a sense of what is happening near you.
Well, first of all, you can hear around me the helicopters were immediately dispatched. Thousands of police are walking around, and the security is enormous around the courtroom. As you can hear, some protesters calling out for Trump, some protesters joyfully celebrating the verdict. Just now, the court gave a verdict. Donald Trump is guilty of 34 counts, 34 felonies, each of which could carry a 5-year term, a 6-year term. But the judge has already indicated he doesn't think he will have any jail time. Nonetheless, the judge did allow Trump to leave the courtroom without posting any bond, and the sentencing will be in 6 weeks' time. This was an enormously fast jury decision, a verdict with such a complicated case. You heard the jury come in and ask questions, try to get the instructions straight, and then in the second day of deliberations delivered a verdict on all counts, guilty as charged. This will be the first American president to be a felon.
Pamela, Donald Trump's reaction afterwards, some of the things he said, a rigged, disgraceful trial.
Right out of,
Go ahead and tell us about that.
Right. Yes, he immediately came out of the courtroom. He said this was rigged, this was a kangaroo court, that this was all cooked up in advance. And that is what he is trying to tell his supporters so he doesn't lose support, because all of the polls show some percentage dropping off of support for former President Trump in his re-election bid if he were to be convicted. And he has now been convicted of all 34 counts. And the reason it's so serious is that these are all felonies, and they're the lowest felony in New York, Class E felonies, but it was a stunning decision in terms of every single one of the 34 counts was guilty. And that means that on July 11th, you'll hear what the sentence is. But for now, no question that former President Trump will appeal. There are two levels of appeal within New York: the appellate division, then the Court of Appeals, and then he can bring it to the Supreme Court. But none of this is going to go on before the election. And ironically or surprisingly, the American Constitution does not bar a felon from running for office or winning office. So he is going to continue his campaign. The question is, what is the impact for him and for around the world?
And just to clarify, Pamela, he's been convicted, but of course he will not be going to a prison cell tonight. He's going to, one presumes, one of his apartments or a luxury home or a nice hotel.
Yes, and the judge has already said during the course of the trial that he didn't favor a prison time for the reasons that the former president is, number one, hasn't committed any prior crimes. Number two, this wasn't a violent crime. And number three, because he didn't want to politicize it and make it more of an issue than it is. And so there is no prison time. There is some talk about some kind of financial fines that he may impose, but all of that will happen in 6 weeks' time on July 11th. Right now, we don't know what the sentence is, and it is unusual for a felon to be released immediately without posting bond, without any kind of released on his own recognizance. The judge just let him leave.
In terms of politicizing things, it's very clear that Trump was doing that himself, wasn't he? He was referring to Joe Biden, the administration, as being behind this prosecution. He talked about it being rigged, a disgraceful trial, criticizing the legal system in the US. Donald Trump blaming everybody but himself for his own misfortune.
Well, ironically, this case was not brought by the feds. I mean, the federal government had the option of bringing these charges of falsifying records in pursuit and in furtherance of his interest in falsifying the records, making them as a payment to a lawyer, not to the campaign, in furtherance of his campaign of 2016. The federal government decided not to press these charges. This is a New York State court, this criminal court. And so the real question is, it does seem more legitimate in terms of the eyes of some of the viewers that this was not a Biden decision to pursue.
Pamela, for now, thank you very much indeed. You're at the place where history has been made. Donald Trump convicted on all 34 counts.
Absolutely guilty.
Pamela, thank you very much indeed. Pamela Falk, our correspondent at the courthouse in New York. Donald Trump convicted on 34 felony counts in the hush money trial. With me here in the studio, Monte Francis, who's been covering the story from the beginning for us here at France 24. Monte, there are people just joining us who are perhaps trying to come to terms with what is going on. Can we start again and just go through the breaking news as we know it? Donald Trump guilty.
That's right. So this jury of 12 people spent about 12 hours, 11 hours and 43 minutes deliberating. They came to a unanimous verdict, finding Trump guilty of all 34 counts, felony counts of falsifying business records. Now, the jury, of course, decides on guilt or innocence. Then the judge is the one who decides the punishment. The sentencing date has been set for July 11th. We have learned a little bit more about the counts here. These 34 34 counts. 11 of the counts related to invoices, 12 of them related to ledger entries, and then 11 related to checks. I believe 9 of the checks were signed by Donald Trump himself. And of course, as I explained earlier, they had to find that all of these documents, each one of them was connected to the furtherance of another crime, whether that had to do with like election interference. There were 2 others, like falsification of other business records or the violation of tax laws. They didn't have to come to a unanimous decision about which of those crimes it was, but they had to decide that, yes, he was guilty of another crime. That's what elevated this to felonies. That's what makes this so serious. Just some reaction coming in. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, who appeared in court with Trump and spoke outside the courtroom at one point during the trial, is calling this a shameful day in U.S. history. That's quite a statement coming from the person who's third in line to the presidency. And a spokesman for the Biden campaign is also coming out and saying the only way to have their voice heard or to keep Trump out of the White House is, of course, to go and vote, and that no one is above the law. And that is really the latest. You know, the thing that's really striking here is the language that Trump used that we heard about this being a rigged trial. The real verdict will be on November 5th. A disgrace. Our country has gone to hell. That's what he said. This all plays into sort of his overall message and his campaign message about being a victim and retribution, and taking, at one point during the campaign, he has said, "I am your retribution." And this plays directly into his campaign strategy. So we'll have to see how this affects him politically. Mark.
Monte, let me pause you. Let's hear a bit more of Donald Trump's reaction outside the court. And can I just say that we're showing this because this has happened and it's a breaking story. And of course, we don't have anything to counterbalance what he's saying. But this is a man who's just been convicted of 34 felony counts in the hush money trial. So it's basically a unanimous decision of all the charges. He's been found guilty. This is the reaction outside. He's blaming everybody but himself.
We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent.
Donald Trump, having been convicted of 34 counts of felony fraud in the hush money trial, then that's his reaction outside court. Let's go to our reporter there, Pamela Falk, who's been following the story for us on the ground in New York. Pamela, we heard Trump there basically calling it a disgraceful trial. He was blaming the Biden administration. He says the country's going to hell, millions of people pouring in across the border. He's basically blaming migrants. He's blaming everybody. He's trying to cite all manner of things, making a political point. Pamela there, we lost the line to her, so we'll come back to the studio and talk more about the situation. So Trump then really making a point politically about every aspect of his campaign in this one statement he makes outside the court, in which he also dismissed, of course, the whole nature of the rule of law by saying that, of course, it was a rigged, disgraceful trial. He also took a swipe at the DA, saying he was Soros-backed. That's dragging in George Soros. I don't know where he's going with that one, but can you give us some context on that?
It's hard to see into the mind of Donald Trump there.
Indeed.
I do have a direct quote here from President Biden, who posted on X, on his campaign account there, saying, quote, "There's only one way to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office: at the ballot box. Donate to our campaign today." So that is the response from the President of the United States, Joe Biden, who is going up against Donald Trump. You know, this is a race that many Americans, the majority of Americans, say they don't want to see. They don't want to see Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, but that's exactly the race that they're going to see. We now have Donald Trump as a convicted felon. This is really unprecedented. We don't know. We've never seen this before in U.S. history. We keep saying that over and over again, but really, I don't think we can understate it.
It's a much overused word, unprecedented, but it really is the word for what is happening right now. If you are just joining us, let me give you the breaking news. Donald Trump, former president of the United States. It was already history that he was facing a criminal trial. History has been made times 34. Because on all 34 counts against him, he has been convicted. Donald Trump is now a convicted felon. He reacted with characteristic anger and hubris outside the court. Here he is talking of a rigged, disgraceful trial, blaming the DA, saying he's a very innocent man. He blamed the Biden administration for what happened. He called it all disgrace. He said the country's gone to hell, the legal system too. And then he went on to blame various aspects of the political campaign in terms of it was the migrants pouring in, it's people coming in, obviously breaking the rules, and he was actually having to swipe at everybody without real control. But basically the theme, it's not his fault, and he's been a victim of the system. That's what he's saying. The system, of course, has found him guilty on all 34 counts in the hush money trial. Let's take a listen now to Donald Trump.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here.
Let's go back to our correspondent, Pamela Falk, who's at the court. She's been observing all matters for us. Pamela, welcome back into the conversation. A corrupt, conflicted judge was what Trump said.
Yes. Yes, I mean, former President Trump is angry. He's calling it a monkey trial. He has called it just a setup. He said Mother Teresa would have been convicted on these charges. But in fact, he has been convicted. And President Biden also reacted from the White House, saying that this shows, the conviction shows, no one is above the law. Now, the conviction is separated into slightly different areas. The 34 counts, 11 counts were related to invoices, 12 related to ledgers, and another 11 related to checks. But ultimately, it is impossible to understate the importance and the significance in this political campaign of the conviction of all 34 counts of Donald Trump on 34 felonies, and making him in history the first president or former president to be a felon. And that is going to begin to reverberate across the United States and across the world, even though we see immediate reactions. And of course, in 6 weeks' time will be the sentencing. But no one really expects, Judge Merchant has been very clear in this case, that no one expects jail time. And in fact, there was no bond posted or released on his own recognizance. President Trump was allowed to leave the courtroom and make those statements that you just quoted. And so it was remarkable how fast, in a very complicated case, that this jury came to this conclusion. But it was unanimous, and it was on all 34 charges.
On all 34 charges, which is quite phenomenal, because there was some debate as to whether some might be judged as misdemeanors rather than felonies, but clearly it's gone to the most serious of the charges that it could be in terms of its gravity.
Yes, and as it turns out, I just want to clarify that misdemeanors were time dated, so the misdemeanors were part of the overall felony, but it could only have been felonies. But they could have said no to some of the charges, but they said yes, he was guilty on all 34.
So to come straight to the point for people who are just joining us, Pamela, Donald Trump then convicted on all 34 counts against him, as guilty as could be in terms of how the jury has seen this. And the jury's evaluated all the evidence. They took over 11 hours to deliberate. They've come back, they've sought advice from the judge. What happens to Trump now? Obviously, he is not going to jail, but what happens to him in terms of this conviction?
No.
He will appeal, I imagine.
Well, he will appeal. There are three levels, in a sense, of appeal in the U.S. system. The first level of appeal in New York is the appellate division, and then the second level is the Court of Appeals. And ultimately, as long as he can show constitutional grounds such as due process, he could bring it to the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, there he might even have some kind of an advantage, but in fact, none of this is going to happen before the election.
And in terms of the words that Trump said outside the court, Pamela, he was very contemptuous towards the court process, very contemptuous towards the verdict and to the
Right.
trial judge. Indeed, he called him corrupt. How does he get away with that? Because
Yes.
I can imagine that being said in a different context where it would end up as a defamation trial, a libel trial. How does Trump get away with this?
Well, of course, as you know, there was a gag order that he violated during the course of the trial. He sparred quite a bit with Judge Juan Merchan. And but at this point, for him to be able to say that, there certainly could be some charges, but at this point he's convicted of 34 felonies, and therefore I don't think anyone's going to care really much or bring any kind of charges on saying that. What he's doing is trying to speak to his supporters to keep them away from peeling off because he has been convicted. And until he appeals, that will stay at least during in the lead up and before the election. And so it is unlikely that that changes at this point, or if it ever changes. And so at this point, he is trying to stem the negative of being convicted and being the first felon in American history to be a former president or current president. And strangely, and it is strange as a constitutional scholar myself, is that the U.S. Constitution does not bar a felon from running or winning public office. So he can run and he can win regardless of any appeals.
As you're talking to us, Pamela, we're seeing a vehicle spiriting Donald Trump away along the freeway. Pamela, I'd like to come back to you.
You can hear it in the background.
I would like to come back to you and ask you more
Absolutely.
about the effect of this, because you were talking about Trump's supporters. Now, clearly his constituency is one that is disgruntled in many ways about a lack of rule of law in the country, or the perception of that. It is a constituency of people who have a certain religious standing and religious belief,
Right.
and might look upon some of the things that Trump has now been convicted of doing as being beyond the pale in terms of who they could vote for. Is there a sense here that this could be the beginning of a crumbling of
Yes.
Trump's support?
Well, of course, he has a great deal of religious community support in the United States. Now, as you mentioned in the lead up to this announcement, it is not a crime in the United States to have committed the acts of marital infidelity, if he did, the alleged acts, with either Stormy Daniels or Karen McDougal. And it's not a crime to pay to have the stories buried. The crime was the cover-up, was falsifying records, calling them lawyers' fees, instead of saying these were business expenses for a political campaign. And that's what he was convicted of. But that has brought into the courtroom and into public domain the actual facts of what he was trying to cover up, which was the allegations of sleeping with an extramarital affair with Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, the Playboy bunny. And so part of it is it's now much more exposed to the public of what he has done, not only the acts themselves, but in covering them up and making sure that the publisher of the National Enquirer went along with it, bringing so many people into this cover-up that it may very well, on that basis, as you mentioned, undermine and certainly tarnish his candidacy. No question.
It does appear, with the nature of the conviction and what you've just been talking about, there is layer upon layer upon layer of hypocrisy about what Donald Trump is standing for at the moment.
Yes. Yes, I mean, the part with Karen McDougal was catch and kill, was they bought the story from Karen McDougal, in other words, paid her, and then made it, had a story go to the National Enquirer, and then the National Enquirer kills the story. That's why it's called catch and kill. All of it is very devious, and none of it's a crime, but it's exposed because of the enhancement of this act of this misdemeanor by the fact that the president, the former president, falsely and defrauded the American public, as the prosecutor said, in order to make it look like it was a lawyer's fee instead of an act that he was pursuing to cover up in advancement of his 2016 campaign.
And is his real victim, Pamela, sorry to cut across you, is his real victim then the candidate who lost the 2016 campaign?
Yes, I mean, part of the real issue here is that the general perception that comes out of this trial, of course, Trump supporters have said they think they're not serious charges, they're not violent charges, they're adding to what wouldn't be charges that would stick on or could be brought on misdemeanors and then enhancing them with felonies. They don't buy it, and they do believe that it was set up to hurt President Trump. But the court went through all of the motions, was very clear, went through all of the charges, and the jury could have given him a pass, could have said he was innocent, and they did not, or even been tied up. There could have been one holdout. There wasn't one. Of the 12 jurors, 7 men and 5 women, all from different walks of life, 2 lawyers, different backgrounds, all Manhattanites, which is what the requirement is in this court, all of that. And they convicted him. And so it's hard for his supporters to say there wasn't a process.
Pamela Falk, journalist and lawyer, I underline, and constitutional scholar. Thank you for joining us and sharing your reporting of the story, which was excellent, but also your analysis of what this means in the greater, wider context, which is all important. Pamela, thank you.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I wish you could hear what's going on. There's like crowds all around me gathering in just because the verdict is so outstanding. Thank you.
History in the making. History has been made. Pamela, thank you for joining us here on France 24 to help us live this story. Pamela Falk there reporting from the courthouse, with Donald Trump has truly made history, becoming the first former US president to be convicted, to be a felon. 34 counts over the hush money case. He's been convicted on all 34 of them. Our coverage continues after a very short break.